Hello, and welcome to the Why podcast from London Business School. I'm your host, Katie Pisa, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by Sir Andrew Likierman, Professor of Management Practice and former Dean of London Business School. Andrew, it's great to have you here today.
Thanks very much for having me.
We're going to talk overall about judgment and AI, but I want to back up a little bit. Your book that came out last year about Judgement at Work, can you tell us how that came about? And I know I've read your book and it's fascinating, how you came about the topic. There weren't a lot of other books about judgment. Maybe just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, in addition to being at the London Business School, I've spent a lot of my career in other organisations as a director, full-time and so on, in public sector, private sector. And everywhere I've been, it's been clear to me that the quality of judgment has been important. And yet somehow people felt they can't pin it down. They don't quite know what it is. So that really intrigued me. And my previous work was on things that are difficult to measure. So I worked on more conventional areas. This seemed to me to fit very well at the category of difficult to measure and yet important. So that's why I've been working on it.
So there've been probably thousands of books written on decision making and other business skills. But why do you think it's just that judgment is hard to measure? And is that why no one else tackled this before?
I think there's a number of reasons. First of all, people are often unwilling to acknowledge that they don't have good judgment. And so saying, I can improve your judgment kind of doesn't strike a good chord very often. In academic terms, it's a difficult subject because it straddles so many different subjects. So it's difficult to get published. So there's not really an incentive in academic life to write about this.
But you had already interviewed, hundreds of people on this topic, so it naturally was a fit for you. But,
yes.
But it still took a lot of time, I'm sure, to write the book.
It did, and it is a difficult subject, and so it's not easy to work in the area. That's perhaps a third reason why people don't often work in this particular field.
Okay. So I really want to talk to you. Let's open with a question of how do you define judgment and why is it so important to humans?
Well, I define it as the ability to combine relevant knowledge and experience with the personal qualities one has to form an opinion or make a decision. So it's not just decision-making slightly complicated. It's a bit more than that. And there isn't a standard definition, but that seems to me a workable one, and it stood the test of quite a lot of people looking at it.
Can you talk a little bit about how judgment plays out in leadership decisions?
Well, if one thinks about the qualities that a leader needs, there are very many of them. One can reel off a list of qualities, the broad picture, ability to get on with people, decisiveness, all those kinds of things. But it seems to me that judgment is an essential part of good leadership. And all you have to do is think about a leader without judgment to know that you're really in trouble. So it seems to me that it's an essential part of good leadership, and something which is not a kind of optional extra.
But you do mention quite a few examples in your book of where, the leader did not make good judgment. And you give some quite interesting examples that, some that we know, but some I didn't know. And it was shocking. And you wonder, how does someone get to that position? So it's just hard to measure one's judgment at times, I suppose.
It is. But, very often people get to positions of authority and power because they've been lucky, perhaps. They haven't had to make very difficult choices, or that they've gone well anyway. Often people get jobs like this because they're seen to have relevant experience. And that alone is not enough. You've got to have something a bit more than experience. Mm-hmm. And leadership, of course, is a very visible role. You can hide things away lower down, but it's much more difficult to do that as a leader.
Sure, of course. In your paper, you show what machines lack. They lack consciousness, ethics, empathy, context, and meaning. Which of these gaps do you think is most often overlooked in the conversation about AI and judgment?
Well, if we look at the relationship between AI and judgment, this is obviously such an important area for all of us, because it's clear that AI is going to be a very powerful influence, whatever our field. You've mentioned a number of things which human beings have got and machines don't. I don't think it's particularly any one of these. It's the combination of these which mean that a machine is not a human being. Let me just give you an example. If you type into ChatGPT a question, quite often, well, I get an answer which says, "That's a really good question, Andrew." And so I think, oh, well, that's great. That's really nice of you to say so, I think to myself. It sounds as if the machine is a human being. And at the end of it, it says, do you want me to give you more detail? So the dialogue is couched as if one is talking to a human being. But that, of course, is a complete illusion. All this has been programmed to make one feel good, actually. I mean, I've tried a question to ChatGPT, and it says it's designed to make me feel good. So thinking about the question of what's the difference between a machine and a human being, it's the fact that it is not simply a thing which does lots of stuff better than human beings, but is actually the same, really. It isn't the same.
Well, it's clever in the way that it makes you think it perhaps has judgment. Yeah. And we know that that is not the case.
Yes.
So far, anyway. So why is it, I guess, that machines lack this exercise, this skill to make judgment? Why is that?
It is simply because a machine is in a different category to a human being. And that's important because if one thinks, all right, well, it doesn't do certain kinds of things now, but it will do a number of things better. Clearly, it's going to get better at doing what it does now over time. No question at all about that. The kind of hallucinations the machines have, the things they make up, those I'm sure will be ironed out over time. But fundamentally, it's because we have two different categories here. And you mentioned a number of things that a machine doesn't have, like consciousness and conscience and things like that. It can be programmed to simulate these, but it doesn't actually have it. And therefore, it depends very much on who has done the programming, the way the data has been trained, the way that quality has been controlled, as to how actually the machine is going to be able to answer your question.
In your book, you have the 6 elements of good judgment. I know that would probably be a separate conversation, but I mean, it does tie into this. So maybe we could just touch on that briefly. Do you want to just describe the 6 elements?
Yes. It's about relevant knowledge and experience. So going into making a judgment, what do you know about this? Not what do you know about life in general and things and so on. What do you know about this particular choice you're about to make now? It's about awareness of the context in which one's making a choice. And that, again, if I can point to the difference with the machine, a machine can be programmed on the basis of things that have happened in the past. But decisions are quite often context-specific. So that's when the human being comes in. So it's about awareness of that context. The third element is trust, who and what we trust. And once again, linking back to AI, the question is, do we trust the machine? We have good grounds for doing it if it's a straightforward issue and which we can check and so on. But much more difficult in areas where we've got high degrees of complexity and ambiguity and so on. So number 3 is trust. Number 4 is our feelings and beliefs. It's how we feel about what's happening, the emotions we have, the biases we might have in making a particular choice. Then there's the question of how we actually make the choice. Now here, AI is good at that because AI very often can pick up things that the human being may not be able to pick up. So in certain contexts, the machine actually is rather better than the human being. And finally, there's the question of delivery. Is it feasible to do what it is that we're trying to do? And again, as human beings, we probably have the advantage over the machine. Not always, but probably have the advantage over the machine. So those are the 6 elements of judgment.
So point 5 is the only one right now that you think, okay, machines potentially have an advantage. But
well, yes and no. It depends very much what we're talking about. Let's just say, we're looking up particular sets of facts or what's happened and so on. Actually, the machine may be better at that in terms of knowledge than it may have a much larger database than us. So in certain contexts, it can do much better on knowledge, perhaps, than the human being. The ones perhaps where it's least likely to be, to provide what we want with any degree of certainty is about awareness and trust, particularly when we're dealing with another individual. Now, we look at individuals and so on. The machine is not geared to looking at the individuals involved in the other individuals involved in a particular choice. And so we have an advantage over machines in that respect, in that we can see in this particular case who's involved and can we trust them.
So we can make a judgment on something the machine just doesn't have access to. So we'll always have that advantage, I suppose.
Well, yes, and I think it's okay, one can break these things down item by item, as it were, but coming out at the end, one then has to take a view, is what it is, what's come out of ChatGPT or whatever it is that something which actually provides a good judgment? And so my contention would be, no, the machine is brilliant at many, many things, but in the field of judgment, I'm afraid it's the human being that we're going to have to look at.
So this is good news for us.
Look, I'm not a die-hard optimist here. I'm not saying it's always better and we'll always be better and so on. I am saying that there are good grounds for believing that machines and human beings are in different categories, and that needs to be recognized.
We're just at a really awkward point in history right now, though, where there's a lot of uncertainty. So it's comforting, to me to hear you say that. But like you said, there's still a lot we don't know. We can be optimistic, but which leads us nicely onto the next area I want to talk to you about. You open your paper with something we all do weekly or even daily: shopping. And for many people, it feels that AI has started to replace the image of the cheerful shopkeeper. I mean, this has been going on for a while. Why do you think that perception is so strong?
Well, look, we go into a small shop and we get personal services. We get somebody who relates to us. That is a more cheerful way, generally, to do one's shopping. Even having somebody friendly, perhaps at a checkout, might be something we like to do. On the other hand, I'm sure we appreciate the efficiency by which we can go round, do the automatic checkout at the end, and get out of the store, and that's fine. But if one looks at, for example, Amazon's attempt to have a completely automated store, these have not been successful. And that kind of indicates the fact that human beings quite like the idea of having a bit of interaction with other human beings somehow. This is something you can't say this is a fault. This is who we are, and this is the kind of thing where, as it were, just having a set of machines to interact with is unlikely to prove very satisfying in a number of areas.
Sure. You state that there's a theory you have that garbage in remains garbage out. Can you explain that? Can you walk us through the areas where human intervention is essential?
Well, if one thinks about how AI goes about its business, as it were, three key elements are the programming, the data training, and the data quality check. These three things have got to happen, and they've got to happen with human beings. Now, to start with then, the question is, how well have these things been done? If you've got an action which involves 3 or 4 instances, and that's all you can train your data on, it's going to be very, very different to if you've got 300,000, And when we ask a question, we don't actually know whether it's 3 or 300,000. So that element there, for example, would require us to check to make sure that what's coming out is actually something which we believe to be credible. So the human being at the end of this has to interpret what the machine has said. The machine does not provide an answer. The machine provides us with data, which we then interpret to provide an answer. So garbage in, garbage out is insufficient data, poor quality data, insufficient data for training is going to be not garbage, but it's going to be a lot less good quality. than if we've got lots and lots of instances. Now, as I say, we don't know that. And that, of course, is one of the dangers of AI.
Of course, there's no warning when we search for something.
Exactly.
Saying, we've had 3 people give input to this, and therefore this is a risky question.
Yes.
We don't know that. My next question was going to be, without the human involvement, which risks do you see? You've sort of answered that already, but with everything still, will it just take time before some of these risks go down?
Some risks will go down. Programming will get better. The way in which the way in which the processes take place are going to be refined. There's no question about that. And also, conceivably, the databases will get even bigger than they are now, and they're pretty enormous now. So lots of things will get better in terms of doing what the machine can do now. One or two things that will not get better is, for example, information that is not in the public domain, by definition, is not known by the machine.
Mm-hmm.
By definition, looking at the question of, what can the machine do? The machine can only do what machines do. That will not get better.
Mm-hmm.
One other thing, by the way, and we haven't mentioned this yet, is the question of privacy. There are issues to do with the question of what happens to the question you put in, what happens to all this stuff that goes in to AI. There are definitely issues of privacy that have got to be addressed. So if I take those three I think remain big issues, even though a lot of other things will get better.
So with privacy, we don't read about that very much right now. That's going to be one of the next hurdles, do you think? Okay.
I think it is now. I mean, I know of organizations that say, do not just type stuff into ChatGPT.
Mm-hmm.
This is confidential information. Who knows where this is all going?
Right.
So I think there's right now an issue of privacy that many people don't realize. I mean, we're so entranced by the notion, rightly, of what AI can do. And it's wonderful what AI can do. That we perhaps don't think about this as much as I'm sure we're going to in the future.
Of course. So, for example, here we have an internal system within school. Is that a little bit safer in terms of privacy, or I don't know what measures companies and organizations are taking right now, but is there anything they can do to control that?
Yes, I mean, there's lots of work being done on the issue of privacy, quite rightly so, and because everybody who knows about this is very concerned about the question of what's happening to this information, where's it going, what's happening to it, and so on. And there are lots of actions one can take. So this is definitely a growth field.
Do you think there are situations or tasks where AI may be more suited than a human? I mean, you touched on that before, some of the knowledge.
Yes.
Is there anything else that we didn't speak of? Is there anything else that you think?
Well, yes. I mean, if I just take, for example, medicine, I quoted my book as an American physician who did work in this area. And what he did is to go through the medical specialties, looking at what AI is actually better than human beings at and where the human being scores. And for example, I remember the example he gave in relation to skin conditions. Machines are very, very good at this, much better than human beings. And there's no question that that's an example of where AI has it over the human being.
You mentioned Dr. Eric Topol in medicine.
Exactly.
In your book, and AI can scan thousands of radiology images, for example.
Absolutely.
But humans, we do make errors and we can miss things. And in this case, wouldn't it be wonderful to know that, something like that wasn't going to be missed?
Exactly. But if we take the other side of the coin, if you go into the doctor and you've got a pain, the pain may be linked to other things, which are very much to do with you as an individual, and also to your psychological state and how you feel and so on, and a number of things. Now, the machine, the machine cannot anticipate all that. The machine is not looking at you, to see how you feel. And the kind of assumption here, I think, is rightly, in his book, I believe, that machines hopefully will do a lot of things much better than doctors can do where they have comparative advantage, leaving doctors to talk to patients.
For the empathy and everything else that is needed.
And an understanding of often quite complicated and personal issues. I mean, in some respects, of course, it'd be great if one simply went in and programmed one's own illnesses, and out came an answer. But that leads to another question here, which is, we have to ask the question, and the way we ask the question is, of course, a very important component of what comes out at the other end. I'm sure anybody watching this has seen the fact that if you've got something bluntly where you don't put the right question in, you'll get the right answer out. They need to reframe the question. And that business of what I think is now called prompt engineering, which is how we ask the questions, is going to be something that we get better at so we can make better use of AI.
So it reminds me of somewhere in your book you talked about how a British person says something and how, was it a Dutch person perceives it? And it's a little bit similar to this in that right now, how the way you ask the question may come out with a completely wrong answer depending on culturally how you say things. Or
exactly, and if we say things with an inflection in our voice, it then means something completely different.
You had an exercise where remind me of the question. I don't know.
I think it's just saying something, factually, and then kind of quizzically, and then rather aggressively. There are different ways one can say something and mean really quite different things. So the input may be words, but the way the input is given is really, really important.
So fascinating. You're right. It's and machines just don't have that. They don't have that capability to whether or not they will one day, still to be seen. But right now,
well, it
definitely.
Could be, for example, that could be an area where machines get better, where machines can understand voice inflections and so on. But
sarcasm, for example.
For example, sarcasm, exactly so. But, I mean, the question of whether something is said in a sarcastic way or as a fact is often quite complicated to pick up.
Absolutely.
So it may be the machines get that.
So looking at senior leadership roles, what are the qualities of judgment that will matter most in an AI-enabled future?
Well, it's clearly the areas where the machine can't do so well, frankly. So I mentioned awareness of context. The particular case now that we're looking at, never mind all the ones that went before, is this exactly the same or is it different? Now, if it's a production line, it's going to be very much the same as before. But we are not production lines. The situations we have are very, very different. So awareness is something where individuals remain very much with comparative advantage over the machine. The question of other people involved. Now, not all of us are good at knowing who we can trust and indeed the data we can trust. But we can improve that. And one of the things that I contend is one's looking at judgment not just to say, that's what's happening, but how can I get better at exercising my judgment? And understanding who and what one can trust is an important part of that. Understanding one's feelings and beliefs is also very important. Now here, ironically, of course, machines rather score over human beings in terms of not having. They don't have certain kinds of feelings.
Sure.
They have biases, and that's the worry we have about whether the machine has been programmed in such a way. And there are many instances where discrimination has occurred because the programmer has programmed according to the fact that everybody is assumed to be male or white or whatever it is. So here, again, the human being may be at a disadvantage, but also maybe at advantage over the machine.
Okay.
In terms of choice, this, depending on the complexity of the choice, the machine or the human being may have comparative advantage. Straightforwardly, the machine probably has it. If there's no particular factors involved in this, done it many times before, machine's going to be good at that. But leadership and, for example, professional life are about complexity, are about difference, are about context. And so here in choice, it's going to be, again, the human being who is going to have to exercise their judgment as to what to do.
I just can't envision a future where a robot or somebody is the leader of a group. That just doesn't seem like in our foreseeable future that could happen. But we'll always need someone who's charismatic and who's motivating us. And I can't imagine a leader being taken over by the leader there will always be a need for a strong leader.
Well, that really comes back, doesn't it, to the fact that we are human beings and we relate to other human beings. It's an interesting point you raise about the question of, could one give one's allegiance to a machine? It's quite difficult to see that. And if one unpicks that, again, one gets to the business of what is the difference between a human being and a machine. Now, we know, frankly, some leaders are not very good. And so, if you have a really bad leader, maybe one should be better giving one's allegiance to the machine.
Maybe some people would prefer a machine, right? Depending on the leader. So that begs my last question, really, is will AI get better, and how soon do you think that will happen?
I think it's going to get better all the time. I mean, this is an amazing field, and, we should embrace it with enthusiasm, try and get to grips with everything it can give us and so on. Because bluntly, if we don't, we may well be out of a job, because it's not just saying, is it us or AI? The working assumption must be it's us with AI to do things hopefully better, more efficiently, cheaper, a number of things, and a better quality. So it's very much about the question of, can I understand what AI means for me? How can I get to grips with this? Keeping oneself informed, making sure one knows what's going on, and then using its potential to improve the way that one does things oneself.
That sounds very positive, if we look at it that way. Gives a bit more hope. And then one last thing, Andrew, we have a signature question for all of our guests on the Why podcast. So, Andrew, why should organizations rethink judgment today? And what is one practical step leaders can take to sharpen their own judgment in the age of AI?
Well, for me, the one key thing one can do is to say, let me recognize the fact that judgment is a factor in the way I make choices. Simply that, being aware of it, understanding that it's a process, not something that comes from the ether or from outer space, wherever it is, that actually it's inside you and you can improve your own. That, for me, is really the key. And
in your book, you go into several ways of doing that. And though you aren't born with good judgment, there are ways that you can help boost it and establish it and make it stronger. So, well, yes, and not only that, but even if you have got good qualities and got good judgment, I believe you can improve it. You can improve it from wherever you are. Oh, it's fascinating. Thank you so much for talking today. Learned a lot from you and really enjoyed reading the book. Thanks for all your insights. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for joining us today on the Why podcast. We'd love to hear your thoughts. How do you see judgment playing out in your workplace? Are algorithms helping or hindering the decisions you make? Drop us a comment on Spotify or YouTube and use the hashtag #TheWhyPodcast to join the conversation. Don't forget to follow and subscribe so you never miss an episode.